in Sydney. The traditional owners of the land here in Sydney are the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. I'm Adina Jacobs, and together with Bobby Marlab, we started Mentor Walks more than 6 years ago in Sydney with the intention of bringing quality mentoring experiences to women everywhere to help them build their networks, have inspiring conversations, and to support women as they work through challenges, big and small, in their careers. In those last 6 years, we've launched in 14 locations in 4 countries. We're in Australia, New Zealand, Singapore, and Canada. And we have conversations going with a lot more locations across the globe. So we look forward to bringing you news of new places that we're taking Mentor Walks to. We've been running these conversation series for the last 3 years, and they're free monthly events that are led by our mentors and driven by topics that our community asks us about. It's our partnership with the Iconic that allows us to bring you these events. So I want to take this opportunity to thank them for their support and supporting our community as well. And if there's anyone here from the Iconic today, thank you. And thanks for being here with us. So, preparing for success, performance and pay reviews with the wonderful Katie Wyatt, who is the head of diversity and inclusion at the Coles Group. We constantly hear from our mentees everywhere that they need support, asking for a pay rise, preparing for performance reviews, or positioning themselves for their career development. Women are socialised to be accommodating and non-disruptive, so advocating for yourself and quantifying your value in the workplace can often feel uncomfortable, and we understand that. Today, we're going to address some practical steps that you can take to help you feel comfortable and confident in your upcoming reviews, because it is getting to that time of year, end of financial year, and there are a lot of reviews going on at the moment. We'll cover things like valuable insights about these conversations from a manager's perspective, learning how to speak eloquently to your KPIs, understanding how to set up clear direction for your career path, figuring out how to deal with an unsupportive manager to a certain degree, although that is a whole other conversation, serious topic that we can tackle at another time, understanding how you can best place yourself to get what you're looking for, and Katie will share examples and stories of what's worked and what hasn't in her experience. She's here today to offer invaluable advice to get what you're looking for in your careers and in your roles. Katie is a 20+ year leadership and business professional with multi-sector experience, and her role at the moment is head of diversity and inclusion at the Coles Group. She's passionate about the power of business to affect social change. Katie's a leader and deep practitioner in organisational development, inclusion, diversity and change. And she's a strategic innovator with direct entrepreneurship cred, with a complex stakeholder management and partnership skills from the private and for-purpose sectors. She brings her extensive experience into play. She drives change throughout all levels of the organisation, from retail all the way through to board level. Coles is a Mentor Walks partner in Melbourne, and they also support our virtual events. And it's through Katie's commitment to diversity and inclusion and to supporting Mentor Walks in our community that we're able to bring you events like these. So Katie, thank you so much for being with us and for sharing your experience. Katie's going to get us started with her key insights, and she's got 4 key areas that she's going to be covering. So rather than waiting for questions at the end of each section, we'll open up the chat for your questions, and then we'll move on to the next section, and then we'll discuss the questions related to the next section. So there'll be 4 different times for you to ask your questions. And I know many of you did send us questions ahead of time, and Katie's incorporated a lot of that into what she's going to be speaking about today. So Katie, over to you. I'm going to ask you to step in now and share your experiences with us. And thank you as well for being patient while we worked out our tech challenges.
No worries. What's a webinar without a tech challenge? Thank you so much for having me, and hello everyone who has joined us at what is, the witching hour for many of us. So I would love to add my acknowledgement of country to Adina's. I am on Wurundjeri land in Melbourne. And I acknowledge elders past and present, and also acknowledge the elders of my country, which is Whadjuk Noongar country in Perth, which is where I grew up. As Adina said, I'm the head of diversity and inclusion at Coles Group, and we at Coles are just so excited that we continue to partner with Mentor Walks. It's such an important partnership for us, and we love the work that Mentor Walks do, and it's great to see the growth that you are having. It's really incredible. I have been working since I was 14 in some form or another, as I'm sure many of the people online have as well, or some may have been in states where you can start even earlier. So I feel like I've had a lot of years of war stories, and really hope that, as well as my kind of 4 key areas, I hope that sharing some of the personal stories of things that haven't necessarily happened at the time that I wanted, or haven't gone as well as I wanted, will help some of you. I have worked across lots of different sectors, so management consulting, Australia Post or postal industry, federal government, not-for-profit and social enterprise, and now I am a food retailer. So it's, I think all of those industries do performance reviews and performance management quite differently. It's likely that a lot of the conversation and a lot of the questions I've seen come through are really about, I suppose, what I would call a traditional corporate commercial business performance management cycle, where your rating may be linked to your compensation outcome, and may be used to determine promotion outcomes, which I acknowledge is not always the case. If you're in a government role, or if you're in a role where you're on an award agreement, you may not have that capacity to negotiate through the performance review cycle. So I just want to acknowledge that up front, which doesn't mean that I think anything here won't be of value. I think it all will be. It just, you just have to think differently about what you're looking to get out of a performance review beyond compensation or beyond a performance rating. It might be about feedback, it might be about growth, which are, often more important anyway. As Adina said, I've kind of got 4 key messages that I have been thinking of, things I want to share around. So I'll go through them one by one, and then, please provide questions as we go. The first key message, I suppose, is to consider the context. And what I mean by that is a couple of different things. So consider the context of the world that we are living in right now. Here in Australia, we are sort of post-COVID, not really, but we're all kind of back at work in different forms. The hybrid working is coming, going, staying, depending on which company or media report you listen to. And I think probably the biggest headlines at the moment around the cost of living pressures, interest rates going up. I think there's a sense that perhaps the last year or two, where we've talked about talent having all the power, may be shifting towards feeling like, well, talent are going to stay put because we're all just trying to pay mortgages. So does that mean that the power shifts a little? And look, I think we're probably somewhere in the middle of that. But essentially, I think companies are worried, employers are worried, regardless of what sector you are in. I think as somebody that owns a budget in my role, a lot of what we're hearing is it's going to be a really tough year. So the reason I say that is not to scare you away from anything that you're hoping to get out of your performance review process, but actually just to be acknowledging that when you go into those conversations, consider the tone, read the room kind of message, and make sure that you're adjusting your thinking and your ask to also acknowledge that that it's not all about one of us individually, it's about all of us collectively. The other context I wanted to talk about is the research that Adina touched on about what we know about the gendered findings, I suppose, in the performance process. And this may not apply to you, but we know from the research that it is pretty consistent, that we often see, there was a Yale study that I was looking at the other day that said despite having a higher average performance scores than men, women are 14% less likely to be promoted each year. which is essentially the summary that Yale made about that was, well, it's a damaging pattern of managers misunderstanding the potential of women when it comes to leadership. I think we all are very familiar with the rhetoric around, if there's a job ad or a promotion, a man might be confident applying if he's got 4 out of 8 criteria. A woman will have 7 and still think she, is not ready for it. And there was also another one, while we're getting depressed, that from Harvard Business Review that found that women are half as likely to have a sponsor than a male peer. So the point of that is, like, we actually have to operate in the system that we are in. So if that research resonates with you, if you are one of those people that thinks, if I just work hard and put my head down and do my job, I'm going to be recognised, but it never happens, we have to kind of acknowledge that we're in a system that has lots of bias, unconscious or otherwise, and sometimes the odds are stacked against our gender. And so you need to use that to guide your approach as well. If you're not, if you're not good enough or good at doing how do I kind of, shine the light on myself and talk about all the great things I do, this is the time to do it, essentially. So I might just pause there, Adina, if there's anything you wanted to add to that context piece, or if there's any questions on that bit.
Sure. I mean, I invite everybody to drop questions into the chat now around the context piece of it. A question that I have is, you touched on sponsorship and, what comes along with that is allyship. I mean, we all want somebody to recognize us and to recognize our experience and to approach us about it. Is there a way to actually flip that and do it the other way around? Like, how can you, or do you have any advice on how people can actually find somebody who can be their sponsor and who can be their advocate in the workplace that can help them be recognized in a better way if it's not happening naturally?
Yeah, look, I think it's a really good question. And I think we've almost done a disservice to our own gender about, like, I don't think people truly understand what sponsorship is. And so that makes it very hard to identify, have you been sponsored throughout your career? Like, I had to really think hard about it to go, well, it doesn't always look like the same thing. It's not always your boss. It's not always somebody in a senior role in a room advocating for you to get a certain opportunity. It can look like lots of different things, and often it's happening when you're not in the room. So you may know even less about it. So I think, to come to the question of how do you kind of almost ask for that, I think if you've got a good relationship with your manager, or even if you don't, they are the person who more than anyone should have a vested interest in you. I mean, the person I have most directly, or the manager I've most directly asked for sponsorship and support, which for me at that time meant more profile with a leadership team. I asked for, funding to get a certain type of development that I was looking for. And that wasn't necessarily a manager I had a great relationship with. I just decided, well, actually, I need, if I'm not doing as well as I feel like I should be, then you need to help me. And this is how you can help me.
Okay. And in terms of the context itself, like the environment that you mentioned before, is that something that we should be bringing up in our reviews, or is it just something to be aware of and be sensitive to?
I don't necessarily think it needs to be brought up. I just think it's that sensitivity too. It's not, walking into a meeting and saying, well, I should be getting a $15,000 pay rise because I saw a job out there on LinkedIn that's paying that and it looks like my job. It's about just understanding that every business, small or large, will have a certain amount of money to spend on pay rises, and that has to be balanced. And hopefully that's happening fairly. But it does mean that it might not be exactly what you want. And it might be that you've got to be sensitive to the fact that, especially if you're in a smaller business, I think that probably hits harder, or in a not-for-profit that is that also has, you know, budget to provide pay rises and individual pay rises. So yeah, sensitivity, I think, and just thinking about how you manage the message of the ask.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, because the managers, the people who are balancing everything, and they're reporting upwards as well. So it's important to understand their own personal context around what they're dealing with. So I think that's a really good way of thinking about it. Thank you. We had a comment here from Mim that Carla Harris does a great TED talk about how to find a sponsor. So thanks, Mim. You should definitely look out for that. And we send out an email after these events with tips that people have put in the chat. So that will definitely be shared with everyone as well after this. Yeah, I think it's a very, very common thing that people don't feel comfortable advocating for themselves. So I think it's a really amazing thing that you can give feedback and information around how people can advocate for themselves and things that they need to start thinking about. Thank you. I think we are okay for questions on this area. Let's move on to our next part.
Sure. So the next key message is preparation, which will probably come as no surprise to anybody that it's in there as a key message. And essentially, even though we are at that time of year that many of us are doing our final or full year reviews, your whole year starts at the beginning of the year. So, and look, if this hasn't happened for you, then keep it in mind for the new year. But it's really about getting the clarity on objectives and goals and making sure that the measures or the objectives that you have in your plan can be proven yes or no. So I think a lot of the time, and I know I have done this many a time, is where I put too many objectives in my plan because I want to be able to show through my objectives how much work I'm doing, but actually that makes it harder to assess, it makes it harder to achieve. So really, I would say whittle it back to 3 to 5 really key things that are linked to the strategy of the team you're in, the strategy of the function you're in, the strategy of the business. And if you're in a business that is a large business or has a bonus schemes attached to KPIs, a lot of those or some of those objectives will probably be cascaded to you from your leader or the leader above. So if you're writing your own about something you're going to deliver, make sure that at the end of the year you can actually prove that it was delivered, because the measure isn't a woolly one. It's actually very clear. It's a yes or it's a no. And I think, making sure that you document these things. I know most organisations have online systems for these now, but I find that people can still be not great at updating their own progress as the year goes on, and asking for feedback from stakeholders as the year goes on. Even at the end of the year, I often see I have people in my team who aren't seeking feedback from all of these amazing senior stakeholders that they're working with, who could be really adding a whole lot of colour to their performance reviews. So never, be afraid of reaching out and asking people for feedback. I think as well, one of the questions that I saw come through before the session was around what if your goals change, i.e. something that you'd committed to got stopped for a reason outside of your control.
The project was cancelled and you'd been working on it, and so you can't measure against that, but it's no fault of your own.
Exactly. And I think that's really, those things you always need to keep the narrative on and make sure you're communicating that. And if 6 months before the end of the year that that something's not going to be delivered because it's been deferred or it's just taking a lot longer, to raise it straight away with your leader. I think I've often seen the situation where people want to go back and change their objective because the world we're in has changed and that means it won't be achieved. But actually, I think the better practice is to don't change the objectives mid-year, but let's speak to what happened, why didn't it get met, and then that can play into the decision that is made about ratings. So the other one, so I've touched on progress and documenting your progress and getting feedback from key stakeholders. I think, you know, the point here is that the performance review process is a really active process. I think that it can often, especially when you have your end of year review meeting with your line manager, and I've done this, it's often just very easy to kind of walk into the room like, okay, tell me what you're going to tell me, when actually this should be a conversation. And if you've got something you want to say going in, or you like, if don't just leave the agenda up to the gods to deliver you the opportunity to say what you want to say, actually make sure you're either setting an agenda up front, or if your manager is leading the agenda and saying a whole lot of things and you're worried you're not going to get time to say your piece, just make sure you're asking for that, because it's got to be active. And that goes to the way you prepare, i.e. this is not just something being done to you and being told to you, but actually you are a huge and key input into the process.
Absolutely, yeah. One of the questions that we have around that is, in preparation, is there a good source of information for Australia to see packages for different positions, different industries, different companies, and also how that sits against male colleagues in similar positions? I know it sort of sounds a little bit specific, but it would be really amazing if there was a resource like that.
Yeah, look, I think, I mean, most of those salary benchmarking things, I mean, there's lots of them, but a lot of them are, you know, they're subscription-based data sets. But I know Seek do annual salary benchmarking. I think LinkedIn probably do as well. I mean, it's hard because a lot of roles are advertised without necessarily having a salary in them. And I think it's definitely something that women, and, you know, I know this isn't actually the topic we're on, but when women are applying for a job and the, you know, recruiters will often say, well, what are you on now? To use that to benchmark. And actually that's not helpful, because women, we know, because of the gender pay gap, are likely to be on a lower salary than perhaps a male colleague of similar experience and age.
And they don't want to lie about it either.
Yes, we want to be transparent, which, you know, is great. But then if employers are using that to set your salary, you're going to come in at a different level. So, I mean, I know we're having a lot of conversations internally about that. That shouldn't be the way that the question is asked. It should be about your expectations, not about what you're on, because we don't want to just keep locking in that gender pay gap as women change jobs throughout their career. But again, whole other conversation.
Absolutely. Another question that we have here on that is, do you have any tips for how to forward plan and generate the deliverable to focus on for the year, which will be the key deliverables that the discussion is based around at your end of year review?
Yeah, look, I think it all comes back to strategy as far as I'm concerned. Like everything that we do, we would hope has a link to the business strategy. For example, I'm a people and culture professional, so I come under a people and culture strategy as well as a sustainability strategy, because diversity and inclusion kind of sits across both. So everything really needs to point back to what are the highest impact things that I am delivering that are enabling the business to meet its strategy. And if that is not clear to you because of the amount of work, or it's not clear how the things you're working on connect back, that is absolutely a conversation to be having with your manager at the time that you're setting objectives, because they need to be able to provide that guidance and really be cascading objectives to you.
Yeah, I mean, I know personally, I've never worked for a big corporate and I've always been in my own business. And I know that sometimes you're so busy doing the work, you don't do a good job setting KPIs for the people who work with you. And so I think, you know, as leaders, it is our job to be able to deliver that message and help people understand how what they do links back. But I know a lot of people here are going to be in the same position where they're not really getting the clarity from their leaders or managers. And so I think that's very helpful for them to set their own KPIs if the business that you're in doesn't actually do that, because you do need to be able to show your growth or your contribution in order to be able to make the case for how you want to progress in your career. So I think it's a very good point. Thank you.
Yeah,
sorry, go on. I was just going to say, if there's any more questions around the preparation side of it, please feel free to drop them in the chat. And Katie, over to you. Sorry, I interrupted you.
No, all good. And I'm just being interrupted here by a little friend myself. So I might just mute myself for 10 seconds. And
yes, go for it. Good. Okay. And this is real life. I mean, it's important for us to know that things come up, especially at this time of day. It's 5:30, and I know a lot of you are probably locking yourself away so that the people in your house don't disturb you. So thank you for being here with us. Katie, It looks like you sorted it out.
I think I've sorted it out for now.
I know I can hear noise in the background here as well, so I'm just hoping nobody comes in.
The bribery of food and television.
Oh yeah, here's your device. Go for it.
Exactly. There was one question in the pre-submitted that I also thought was worth referencing about, because it comes back to the preparation piece, and it was about when you feel overskilled in your current role, and that can happen for a number of different reasons. It could be that you've moved internationally, interstate, from one employer to another. I know it's happened for me a lot when I've done lateral moves in my career, because I've definitely not taken a linear trajectory. So you can often start something thinking it's fine, I'm happy to take the sideways or the backward step, but then you can get frustrated quite quickly because you start to think, well, I'm better than this, I've got more experience in this. But what I would say is patience is key, and my message 4 will come back to that point. But also, even if you think you're overskilled, you still need to be able to demonstrate how you are overachieving against your objectives in order to get that recognition from your employer.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you. We have a few questions that have come through on that as well. How can we link performance review results to salary increase more transparently? For example, if you've been in a certain level for more than a certain time frame and you got an increase subject to the situation, how can you clearly demonstrate that information so that you can get what was promised to you?
I'm not sure I 100% understand the question, but I think there's a couple of bits in there. Is it about the transparency of employers to individuals about how salaries are set or what bands are? Is that?
Yeah, Katie, that's the question.
Great.
I've asked. Yeah, so I know I'm with Coast as well, and I have experience with Australia Post, with Interstates at US, and other companies. And I was a contractor, so for me, my performance review was really simple. I'm gonna renew your contract, or I'm not gonna renew your contract. So that's easy, right? But for, let's say, permanent, I know there are different bands or the different rating systems, but what is how I see it is not really transparent. Is we're gonna do the performance review. We're gonna review to see whether you meet your objectives. But in terms of how that linked to a salary increase potentially, like how that, what I'm saying, it's like a secret machine calculate behind the scenes saying, okay, now I'm gonna give you, 2,000 increase. That kind of thing was not really transparent. Not saying cost is like across the board, right? So I worked in so many companies. That's always the question in my mind of how this secret machine calculate and get to know, and why I don't know the rule. And I was a BA for a long time, right? So the rules of how this thing works is always bothers me. So I don't know whether you have some insight.
Look, I think the thing is most employers are still in that phase or where being transparent about bands or pay ranges is not par for the course, I would say. I do think that modern remuneration strategy and thinking is about shifting that dial, but I think it will take a lot of time, especially in a country like Australia where we just don't talk about pay. It's not a socially acceptable thing to be talking about what you're paid and what I'm paid, and like it's just, you might with your close friends, etc., but it's not an open discussion and conversation. I think that that will change over time, but will it happen in the next 5 to 10 years? I don't know, but often those decisions are linked back to the performance rating that you get, and then then it will depend on what the budget for remuneration or increases is and how that is being used. Is it being used to just reward performance, or is it being used to address pay equity issues, which I would say happens a lot in a lot of companies because we are legally required to be paying fairly and equally for like roles. So I know that that's definitely a focus of remuneration teams in lots of companies.
I'll jump in for 1 second and just say, from a smaller business, privately owned business perspective, typically the salespeople, they've got very clear understanding of what their bonus process is going to be. It's not necessarily a pay review, but it's more related to bonus. Whereas other people in the business, it's not as clear because they're not linked directly to the sales of the product. So the reason why there's a lack of clarity isn't because we don't want people to know what they can aim for. It's more about we don't know what the pot of money is until it's available. And so it's a little more fluid than that. It's definitely not a matter of trying to keep it a secret or have, like a secret society around it. It really is just more about managing what's in front of you when it happens and then being fair about it at the time.
That is a great point. You're absolutely right. The pot at the end of the year is not known at the start of the year, and that goes for big companies as well. Lots of things change. The last thing I wanted to say on the prepare bit, and then we should probably move on, is just about help your manager be your advocate. So a lot of these, we have the conversation with our manager about our end of year review. It's, conversation both ways. You don't necessarily talk ratings in those meetings. Decisions are rarely made in those meetings because often the manager is then going off either to, a leadership team, performance calibration, or somewhere else to make the final decisions that we then kind of as individuals get fed back later. So you want to make it as easy as possible for your manager to be your advocate. So don't just kind of say what you want and not give them the easiest argument for them to argue for it. I think that is probably the biggest single thing that people do that lets them down, is they just assume if I just summarize and say, I met all my objectives, I'm a really good operator, I've had really good feedback, but that's it, then that's not really making it that easy for me as your manager to go into a meeting with, 10 other people and say why what you did is over and above and deserves a higher rating, better review, etc.
Absolutely. Thank you. On to clarity.
Clarity. So this one, and look, it probably touches on a lot of what we've just discussed and will continue to build on that, but it's essentially about trying to get as clear as possible about what you want and what good looks like for you. What does success look like for you? I mean, it's very easy to fall back on it'll be a promotion or it'll be a pay rise. That will be success. But actually, is it really? What is it about a promotion that is is driving you? Like, what is that going to give to you that you aren't getting now? Is it actually that you wanted a new experience? Is it that you want to have more experience managing people? You want to be managing a larger scope project? Like, I actually think it's really important and really hard to do, and particularly as women, to really get underneath what am I actually looking for, because that can really help if a promotion or the pay rise you want isn't on the table. Then what can you ask for instead? If it's that you want a different work experience because you've been in your role for 2 years and you're ready for a change, then you can clearly articulate that and say, these are the things that I know I'm really good at. This is an area I don't know as much about, but I think I could bring lots of skills to. Could I get an experience or a secondment over there? I think as a manager, like as both as an individual, I actually am very guilty of going to my manager and saying, I'm ready for growth. I'm ready for something new, a new challenge. But then when I'm asked, well, what does that look like? Tell me what. I actually am like, I don't know. It's just like, it's just growth, you know, new challenge. And actually, as a manager, I now realize how that doesn't help my manager at all.
Well, especially if they're trying to balance the same request for a number of different people. Do you have any like specific exercises you can point people to? I mean, I know that like it's come up quite a few times through different conversation series that we've had, where it's so important to actually make the time to think about what you want and how you want to craft your life. And if you don't put the time into it, like nobody else is going to put the time into that. So you really need to make that effort and do the hard work on yourself, because that will then pay dividends either in experience or in money or in position when you can articulate that clearly. But I think where a lot of people trip up is they know they need to do it, but they don't know where to start. So if there's anything that you can share around, like, how do you actually start asking yourself those questions and putting together the information that will help you clarify that?
Look, it's a tough one. I think there's a podcast I listened to last night that I actually thought was a really fascinating, almost companion piece to this conversation, which was, it was on the Imperfects podcast, the one with Hugh Van Cuylenberg, and they were interviewing, and I'm going to say her name wrong, Kemi Nevaval, and I will send it. Yes, who is an amazing coach, but it was all about how you define success. And I was fascinated because, you know, it made me very aware how we're talking so much today about that extrinsic success, and am I being validated by my employer through my compensation, or that when what she's talking about is actually knowing internally what your definition of success is. And she ran through a couple of activities with the hosts that I thought were quite cool. So I definitely, if that's something that resonates with you, definitely check out that podcast.
That's great. Thank you. I love a good podcast recommendation.
Oh, don't we all?
Yeah.
So,
okay. And I think the other thing that I've found, sorry, I'll just add something small.
Yeah, great.
The thing that I've found as well is even just like taking the time to do a simple SWOT analysis on yourself can really help clarify what you're good at, what you could improve in, what your opportunities are within the organization that you're in, and, you know, where things could get a bit tricky. And from that, there's so much else that you could then learn about yourself. And so if you don't know where to start when thinking about what you want, just do a simple SWOT analysis on yourself and take the time out of the office on your own to actually put that time into yourself. And Anastasia, we will send the name of that podcast out when we send the follow-up, and we'll also do the same thing, Mary, on a SWOT analysis. It's SWOT, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats.
Yeah, I love that, because it's something that I am very bad at, and it actually relates to my final key message, which is to play the long game. Brilliant. And that quote, actually, I've stolen it from when I went and saw Barack Obama speak recently, name drop or what. But he talked about one of the big lessons for him about his time as president was to play the long game. And actually there were so many moments when things are not working and everyone's against you, and you just have to keep the longer term view in mind. And for me, who I am not a long-term planner, I don't have the 5-year plan, I don't have the 10-year plan, never have. And for me, what that meant was actually just not getting knocked down by the day-to-day stuff, because you remember that actually it's all in service of something. And what I've learned over my career, because all I did in my career was I had no strategy. I followed opportunities, passions, curiosity that led me into sideways steps, backward steps. I changed industries, I changed functions, I started a side hustle. Like, it felt like I had no strategy and plan because I didn't. But now when I look back, it's that, the 2020 hindsight thing where I go, oh, wow, like what a story I can tell about my career. So it gives me a lot of faith now in my 40s that actually, even when I'm not getting the thing I want in that moment, it's going to work out, and there's a longer term view that will be fine, even if I don't know exactly what it is or what I'm targeting. So I think that is a really important message, and is hard, given what I said about having clarity, can be quite hard to balance the two things of, well, what is my long game? Because that's the clarity I'm trying to give to others to help me. But also there's a bit of, we don't always have it, but sometimes you got to have a bit of trust in the universe and ask the people that you trust. Sometimes I develop my plan based on what somebody I admire is doing or did after me. And I go, well, that seems like a good idea for now. And then I'll adjust as I go.
But I do think having that clarity allows you to play the long game, because it means that you don't expect to get everything all at once, and you understand that things happen in stages.
Yes. And I would say, when I was jotting down every sort of performance review that stands out in my mind over my career, I was like, even when I got the thing I wanted, it never happened when I wanted it. And by the time it happened, I was usually like so far beyond ready for it. Yeah, that it's almost anticlimactic. And I think it comes back to the podcast I recommended, is actually that means you need to recognize that the success wasn't about the thing you thought it was. It was actually about what you developed or what you achieved, or the impact that you had. So that's been, a real insight, is that it's rarely yes on the exactly when you think you're ready for it.
Yeah, okay. There is a question here about, is there an obligation of a company to increase wages based on cost of living, etc.? Is it worth talking about that in your review meeting, or is it a company to company policy?
Oh, look, I think this one's a controversial one. I did see an Instagram post the other day saying, if your employer doesn't give you a CPI percentage increase, then they've given you a pay cut. And I think that is quite a simplistic view of the world. Like, you can go, yeah, I can see how the maths work out there, but actually businesses are struggling as much as we all are as individuals. Yeah. And especially for small businesses, like, you've talked about, Adina, you've got so many competing pressures to manage. So no, I don't think there is an obligation. I think it's about affordability and sustainability.
Yeah, thank you. That's a really good point. Should we open up for general questions?
Yeah.
To cover. Okay.
No, I think I'm done.
Any questions, please drop them in the chat. I think it's been a really amazing conversation. I think one of the things that's really struck me is how we really need to take responsibility in our reviews to make sure that we're advocating for ourselves as well. And it's not enough just to, put your head down, bum up, and hope that other people notice you. There's a way to show what you're doing, set the goals, show how far you've moved, and show what your contribution is without being arrogant about it, but that really helps your manager then talk to their managers and get you further along to where you want to go. I think that's a really good and important point. If there are any questions, please drop them in the chat. I'm going to actually just go to our other questions that we received beforehand as well. There is one here. What can you do when you experience resistance?
Look, I think if you are, I mean, that could mean a lot of different things, but if it's that you're going into your review conversation and not getting the outcome that you're looking for, I think it's about, you know, like we've touched on, well, if you're not going to get the first thing you've asked for, is there something else that you can ask for? Or where is the resistance coming from? Is it your interpretation of the no, or is it true resistance? Because, you know, two people will have a performance conversation and two people will have a different view of what happened in it. So I think take time to reflect. I think if you feel like you're in the meeting and it's not going how you wanted it to, don't try and speak in the moment, especially if you're feeling emotional. I think just kind of listen, take notes, and then say, look, I need to reflect, and then come back to you in a couple of days.
A really good point. Thank you. Another question here from Jenna is talking about the long game. If you've been offered an opportunity that will get you where you want to be and the business is compensating for it, would you sacrifice asking for more knowing that you're worth more? Like if you've been promised something ahead, would you take that, or would you like hope that would you push for more early on?
So you're kind of doing the job with the promise that it's going to be rewarded at some point in the future. Look, I think that comes down to how much you trust the person that's telling you that, and whether you're willing to wait, and whether you're getting good growth experience and satisfaction out of the work you're doing. I mean, I've waited a year for a promotion that I, you know, was pretty confident I was going to get, but it was a timing issue. It was a context issue. And I was kind of comfortable waiting because I did trust it was going to happen, and I understood the context, and I loved my job, so it was okay. But if you like, they're just saying it to get me to do stuff that they don't want to pay for, then that's a different question.
A follow-up question to that from the same person, Jenna, is: do you have any tips on holding your employer accountable?
Oh, well, I think that again, that comes, for me, it comes down to the relationship you have with your manager who's having this conversation with you. I don't know if you would add to that, Adina, when you're probably having a lot of those conversations in a small business.
Yeah, no, it definitely does come down to relationships, and it also comes down to really being known as being a team player. Like, we're aware of the fact that everybody's under massive financial pressure at the moment with rising interest rates and rising cost of living and everything. The worst thing you can do is come and say, I need a pay rise just because. Like, we need to actually understand what you've done to benefit the business. It's not enough to just want it and think that you deserve it. You actually have to demonstrate that. And I think that you know, when it comes to holding people accountable, like, you need to be accountable as well. So it's a game that's played on two sides. And if you've got a good relationship with your manager and even with other people in your team, you need to like keep records of what's going on, talk about it openly. I mean, I don't know if this is different in larger businesses or big organizations, but like, if I'm only finding out things at people's review time, I'm not doing a good enough job as a leader. Like, we should be knowing what's going on all the way along. Those reviews, and there shouldn't be the time for surprises. They're just the time for having like the wrap up of the conversation. So I would say, if you really have something to say and things that you need to talk to your manager about, don't wait a year for that end of year review. There should be conversations happening on a regular basis. And so there are no massive surprises or big bombs that are being dropped at that time. The other thing that we do as well is we send out a review questionnaire that both the employee fills in and that we fill in as well, and we share them beforehand and then discuss them in the conversation. So the agenda's set, everybody knows what we're talking about. it's usually not like a very emotional conversation because we know what's coming and we've set the framework for it. And I think also people who don't know what to say in their reviews, having that framework of the questions beforehand really helps them think about how they can have those conversations. It makes a big difference.
I think that's great advice. And you're absolutely right. If you go into your performance conversation and you're getting feedback, but you're like, where has this come from? I did that work in Q1. Why am I hearing about this piece of feedback now? That tells you that your leaders let you down because you haven't been made aware as you go on how you're going. I totally agree. It's not about, oh, what am I going to hear in my performance review? It should be all pretty well known.
I do just want to make a quick point here that we started a little bit late, so we're going to just go a few minutes over. I hope that's okay with everybody, but totally understand if you had a hard stop at 6 o'clock. So one of the next questions that comes up is a really good one. We've talked about preparing for a review, but are there any post-meeting tips to solidify some of the topics or ideas discussed? Should we be sending a summary email out afterwards? What do you suggest to really lock down what you've discussed in those meetings?
Look, as a leader, I would document the conversation I have had with my team member, and that is actually part of what we do at Coles in our system. But I think if you're the person that's had the conversation and you want to make sure that you're capturing a record of it, then absolutely put it down in an email. If there were actions that you both took, put those in an email. Absolutely. You can never over document this stuff, and it'll be a good one to come back and reflect on and think, well, did I do that? Did they do this? Did I, because a part of the performance review as well should be about development needs and what are you looking for and how are you going to get that in the new year? And then that feeds into you setting your goals for the next year. So yeah, I'm a big fan of documenting.
That's a very good segue into the next question from Liv, which is, do you have any advice on pushing for investment in development from your employer when the business is still in the building or foundation stages?
Oh, that's an interesting one, because obviously in a large business, that's often a good strategy. If you can't get more money, is to ask for development. But in smaller businesses or foundational businesses that maybe don't have that money, I just think there is so much development around that is free if you're considering development to be training. And often we are working with people who have an amazing array of skills that have nothing to do with the job that they're doing. So you can, use the Google approach of teaching each other the things, weird and wonderful things that and can skill up each other in. I think it's about shifting what you think about development and what is it, and does it need money? Is it about I want to shadow someone for a day a week? Is it about I want to work on a project that's out of the scope of my role, but will give me a really good exposure to something? I think there's lots of different ways to be developed.
Thank you. That's a really good point, and I agree. And I think it comes down to the people who are going in for the reviews as well to take some of the responsibility to do that research and see what the other opportunities are in the organisation.
Absolutely.
Okay, well, we're a couple of minutes over now. I think we're probably good to wrap up unless there are any other questions. But I think we've covered an enormous amount in a short period of time, and I think that a lot of that's been very useful. Katie, thank you so much for being so generous and taking the time to think about this and do this and sharing your experiences with everybody. I know it's a tough time of year for many, especially at a time when things are really challenging from an economic perspective and just culturally and societally. So I think having this guidance and having these hard conversations, it makes a really big difference. And thank you again for being here for our community and supporting us.
Thank you for having me. It's been an absolute privilege.
Amazing. Thank you. And thank you everyone for being here and for asking your questions and for putting up with our tech glitches. We really appreciate it. Sam has dropped a survey into the chat. If you could please take a few minutes and just answer that survey. It helps us understand how we can improve these events for the future. Please have a look on all of our social media and on our website for any upcoming events that are coming through, and we'll see you at the next event. Thank you so much, and I hope you all have a great night.